We're back in the Gutters Club.
That's right, it's Saturday and you're here and we're so glad you are. Now, I think every period of music has got its own special sound. You know, you hear something from the Eagles and immediately you're back into the 70s.
Yes.
That sort of California sound. I love that sort of music myself.
Yes. A lot like, actually, Simon and Garfunkel
Yes.
in their early days. How that was poetry in a song.
Yeah, something special about it.
Yeah.
And don't forget the words of the poet are written on the subway walls.
I've seen them on the subway wall, in toilet walls as well, now that you mention it.
It was a phone number you were going to pass on to me, but never quite happened yet. Now, you've seen my record collection, and yes, I'm old school. I still turn the platter, and I still buy most of my music that way. But if I'm interested in listening to a band, I'll use my Spotify type account. I use Tidal, because I'm one of those music purists, and give it a go, and if I really like it, I'll still spin things on vinyl. But I'm an unabashed Paul McCartney fan.
They're making a big comeback, vinyl.
Vinyl is, and I think it's actually to do with Taylor Swift, believe it or not. Now, talking about Paul McCartney, as I often do, I think he's God's gift to music. I think he's honestly the Mozart of the previous century. I really do. But before his last album came out, Taylor Swift actually spoke to him and said, look, just for you, Paul, I'm actually going to hold off the release of my record so you've got a chance at getting number one. And that's what mates do. I love Paul McCartney. I love the music of the Beatles. But I think there is actually an argument that the Monkees can be mentioned in the same breath as the Beatles. Is that sacrilege to you?
Well, I've heard you say, and who am I to doubt you, although I'd like to, that the Monkees, even though they were, not altogether a bad band in their own right, wrote songs for huge artists all over the place.
Yeah, they did. So I know that we always talked about the Beatles, or some people referred to them as our boys, as the Fab Four, and then derogatory term for the Monkees was the pre-Fab Four.
Yeah.
But I actually disagree. I mean, sure, the Monkees was a project. It was a TV show.
Yeah.
So you're going to recruit actors. It just so happened that amongst the mix, they managed to get Mickey Dolenz, who I think had, I would argue, the best voice for the 60s. Now, I would go so far as to say that Paul McCartney's voice wasn't yet mature in the 60s, and come the 70s, I think Paul McCartney had an even better voice and had the voice of the 70s. But to get Mickey Dolenz as the lead singer for the Monkees was just a standout.
But you know what is also a little bit of an equaliser is that Paul McCartney, as good a singer as he is, he was the pretty boy of the band.
Yes.
As was Davy Jones in the Monkees.
I think so. That's really how they tied it together. So they got someone who's Manchester-based in Davy Jones. The idea at the time, now I understand that the concept for the Monkees predated the Beatles, but once A Hard Day's Night came out in the cinemas, it really crystallised exactly what they were after. What they did, they advertised for 4 Ben Franks types, people who were all-nighters and would attend that sort of hipster restaurant, must come down for the interview, as in be clean at the time of the interview. To attend, they managed to get 2 actors and they managed to get 2 musicians. I'm a big fan of them all, so let's have a little bit of a talk about it. The Monkees did 2 television series in 66, 67 to 68. The first album came out in 66, straight to number 1. You know, Last Train to Clarksville, Hey Hey We're the Monkees, that stuff. Songs which are written by the best music artists of the times of Carole King, Boyce and Hart. Your favourite musician of all time, Neil Diamond, was writing hits for them as well. Come 1967, the Monkees had 3 number 1 albums in the US. 3. Can you believe it? And really what they tried to do was shirk off this idea that they were a manufactured band and get some sort of control over the music that they were producing themselves. So Michael Nesmith, the guy you might remember who wore the wool hat, sometimes green and sometimes blue, he was already an established songwriter. You know, Different Drum that Linda Ronstadt and the Stone Ponies did. That was a song that he'd written even before the Monkees.
I never knew that.
Yeah, and when the Monkees heard it, he just casually said to them, it was on the radio, oh yeah, I wrote that, and they just couldn't believe it. No, that surely you didn't write that. Yes, in fact, he had.
Wow.
So he essentially tried to arrest, together with Peter Tork, the other true musician of the band, music control from Don Kirshner, the chap who in Hollywood was described as having the musical ear. And there was a famous occasion where Mike Nesmith was together with him in a hotel room, put his fist through the plaster wall and said, "Well, you see that? That could have been your face." The result of that...
Is that an urban myth, or did that actually happen?
That is the honest truth. The result of that was their third album and third number one album, Headquarters, where essentially they had arrested music control. Now, what that meant, just like the Beach Boys, okay, they were using the cutting crew to do a lot of the music for their albums. They weren't playing all the instruments themselves, and that was the same as the Monkees. But I mean, how could they? They were filming on set 15, 16 hours a day, recording the lyrics, the vocals for all of the albums, and how could they have done everything else, plus touring as well? But by the time of Headquarters, in fact, it's them playing the music, and most of the songs on this album are written by the Monkees as well.
Now, I know you saying that the two main characters, they really were the actual musicians. So what about the other two, who were primarily actors, as you say?
Yeah, well...
Did they have input into the music or what?
For sure they did. So Mickey Dolenz, who I describe as having the voice of the 60s, he became the drummer because he says that when they were asked who wanted to be the drummer, the other three took a step backwards, and a la military style, he was the one that was left there.
Yeah, he volunteered.
But for an actor to have a voice like that, how amazing. And then some people in Australia confuse who was the lead singer of the Monkees and believe that Davy Jones, the Englishman, that he was in fact the voice of the Monkees. No, he wasn't. He sang on some of their big hits. And again, we've got a unique character there, a brilliant dancer, a brilliant actor, someone who actually had stage experience. And he was the only one of the four that was already earmarked and under contract to be a member for this project for the Monkees. So 67 happened. This album came out. This was the second album from 67. So you had more of the Monkees came straight out, and then shortly after Headquarters. And this was really their chance to shine because they'd arrested the music control, they'd played their own instruments. An unfortunate thing happened. Can you imagine the worst thing that could possibly happen when you put this album out? Well, I'm going to tell you, 4 days later, a little album called Sgt. Pepper's came out.
4 days later.
Yes. So, Monkees Headquarters had 4 days at number one. Now, there was a lot of regard between the Beatles and the Monkees. So there's actually a song that was written by the Monkees themselves where they talk about the Beatles holding court and then visiting, the four kings of EFI are sitting stately on the floor. That's when they went around and they were greeted warmly at a private party by the Beatles. And John Lennon said, "Yeah, I get it. I understand what you are. You're the modern day Marx Brothers." And that's effectively what their music, what their television show was. But their music transcended that, I believe.
Sgt. Pepper.
Yeah.
That transformed the Beatles. That was right out of their ballpark. There's a lot of talk that they were high on acid doing a lot of that. It was right psychedelic type stuff.
You can make up your own mind about the track Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, which is on that album. I think for that time period of the two albums that came out for the Beatles, one of them was an EP, which was Magical Mystery Tour. I'd argue Magical Mystery Tour was probably better than Sgt. Pepper's, but if George Martin had done the right thing, and he regretted this to the day that he died, and actually kept Penny Lane and Strawberry Fields and not released them as a single and kept it off the album, but put it on the Sgt. Pepper's, there's an argument that would be the best album ever released in the history of pop and rock and roll. I can't disagree with that, but it didn't happen. As it didn't, I would probably say Magical Mystery Tour, probably slightly stronger. My favourite member of the Monkees, though, has got to be Mike Nesmith. Now, that's saying a lot because I'm a banjo player, so I should really go straight for Peter Tork, who was the banjo player.
Isn't he whose mother was the Tipex Queen?
You got it. Yeah.
Remember Tipex? You still remember Tipex?
Liquid paper in Australia.
Like on a computer screen, if something goes wrong, you don't go, you white it out straight on the screen. Remember that?
When we still used MS-DOS, that's why green liquid paper was more popular.
Green liquid.
Yeah, or blue for the colour of the font. I've been lucky enough to see the Monkees a couple of times in the last 6 years. including the very last time that Mike Nesmith came out. Now, I was prepped. Michael Nesmith hadn't toured with the Monkees for a very long time because he'd actually engaged in so much. I believe that he was one of the fathers and parsons of country rock music. You know, what's country rock? Essentially, country music played with electric guitars. I was ready as soon as I heard that the first national band, which was the band that Mike Nesmith started after the Monkees.
What?
Yep, first national band was about to play again in America. I was this close to buying my ticket and going. But funny thing happened. A couple of weeks later, it was announced that the Monkees were reforming and playing in St Kilda.
Yeah.
Not I thought that was poetic. At the Palais.
At the Palais.
At the Palais, where in fact Michael Nesmith had recorded an album. I've been lucky enough to get a few autographed albums. Mickey Dolenz signed this one. And this is a recent album where effectively he covers the music of his compadre, Michael Nesmith. And I was lucky enough to see them both perform live. Mickey Dolenz has actually just released an album 2 months ago. I've listened to it on Spotify. It's brilliant. And what he's doing is covering the music of REM.
Oh, wow, okay.
Yeah, so it's an EP, but it's well worth listening to. So once the Monkees went through the whole period of the television series naturally came to an end after 2 seasons.
Then they brought out the cartoon versions. Remember?
I can't remember the Monkees doing a cartoon version,
yeah.
no.
Well, same as the Beatles,
The
with
Beatles
Yellow
certainly
Submarine and all that. Remember that?
I certainly remember Yellow Submarine. The next album came out and it only hit number 4 on the charts, but it had the song Daydream Believer, which I think is fantastic. But the time in the sun had naturally come to an end, and it wasn't until some time later that probably the worst album cover in the history of music came out, together with an also-ran sort of album. Now, this was in 1987, just after the Monkees were thrust into the spotlight of the world again, and with good reason. Now, Michael Nesmith, the chap we discussed, the father of country rock music, mother invented Tipex, he's also the father of MTV music and the modern pop clip.
Oh,
now, I say that with good reason. Some people say that the first real pop video clip done was Rio, which he did, was a big hit in Australia, and he played it when he came out. I was very pleased about that. But he also did a video disc called Elephant Parts that had 4 or 5 music videos on it. And he also produced a video show that he showed to the directors of MTV. That's how that all started. So, with Poetic...
Ah, that's how MTV... Okay.
Poetic
that
Justice...
makes more sense.
In 1986... MTV did a whole music marathon where they played all 2 seasons of the Monkees. And the reaction was incredible. People who are now considered second-generation Monkees fans got into it. They reformed, they toured, they had a lot of success, and it's been in the public conscience ever since. But, unfortunately, this is the album cover. Yeah.
Hang on, there's someone missing.
Yeah, there is. So Mike Nesmith was otherwise excused. He was too busy. But Dad Pods...
Where's Davy Jones?
No, he's there.
Oh, there he is.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Glasses.
Mike Nesmith...
Can I borrow yours?
Absented himself for that. Reform for the Justice album. I have recently watched a Beatles movie, so I went back and watched... what was it called? A Hard Day's Night.
Yep.
It has aged like a perm. But I'll argue that when the Monkees did their movie, they did one better. If you're watching this on TV and you've got your phone nearby, just plug in Monkees Head, H-E-A-D. They called it that, and apocryphally, they said, we called it that because when we wanted to do our second film, we would be able to say, from the guys who gave you head.
Oh, dear. I love it. I like him already.
So the opening scene of that film is the 4 Monkees suiciding, jumping off a bridge, effectively like they did in Headquarters, wanting to arrest control of themselves creatively. That's what they did. So they did that by suiciding in the film. It's a stream of consciousness type film, so it goes from one scene to the next. You could be in a tavern where there's a Western tavern where there's a bar fight, and then suddenly you're actually in the trenches of World War II. It's that sort of stream of consciousness. Can you think who is zany enough to have written that film for them?
That English comedian.
No, even better than that. I think I know who you're thinking of. Jack Nicholson wrote it for them.
Oh, no.
Yes, he did. So what I'm asking you to do, Have a look at the film Head. You'll be able to find a poor copy of it on YouTube for sure.
Jack Nicholson.
Jack Nicholson wrote it for them. That's right.
Okay.
And it is
Wow.
aged a heck of a lot better than A Hard Day's Night that was only done a couple of years before that. Now, they were going through a bit of a self-sabotage period, I think, at that stage. Before that had even hit the cinemas, they agreed to and filmed 33 1/3 revolutions per monkey. You'll be able to find an incredibly bad version of it on YouTube. If you buy the Blu-ray version of it, unfortunately, for copyright reasons, they've cut out about 20 seconds of it, where you've got some of the greatest blues players and old rock and roll performers
Wow.
in the history of music in it, but you won't find that if you buy it, so you'll find it on YouTube. The project had to come to an end, but what I'm so glad that we got out of it was that country music from Mike Nesmith. For me, that was absolutely worthwhile. I just want to finish on this point. When Paul McCartney did music well, this was, the Ram album, his second solo album.
Yeah.
It was panned by the critics. It was panned by the fellow Beatles.
I haven't seen this album.
Okay, some people say it's the debut of lo-fi music. It's incredibly good. His voice had developed into the best voice of the 70s. I think this is where his voice overtook Mickey Dolenz as the best voices for rock and roll music.
I haven't seen that album at all.
But if you could only blend the music that Paul McCartney was doing together with the strength and the country timbre that Mike Nesmith had, I think you'd have the perfect musician. I think we can seriously mention the Monkees in the same breath as the Beatles. They had the best songwriters of the day working for them, and in time they become some of the best songwriters as well, together with the voice of Mickey Dolenz and the country sensibility of Mike Nesmith.
I have to admit, I actually like them both. It's like admitting that you like ABBA. But I actually do. How sad is that?
No, I remember as a young man asking you what your preference for women was, and you said to me quite candidly, I like women. I think it should be the same with good music too. And music of this period, it's just so well mixed, so well produced, so well written, and it's just ear candy.
It's not bad. I have been educated.
Yeah. Do yourself a favour, have a look at the Monkees Head. I think you'll have a laugh.
Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks, guys.
We'll see ya.